ultimately, more than anything, your attachment style is the relationship you have to yourself. Because your core wounds that you have from your childhood, that's your conditioning. So that'll show up for you at work, that will show up for you in your physical area of life, that will show up for you in your friendships, family, career, like it will go everywhere. And so what's so interesting about what you said, and I love that you called that out because honestly, most people miss this, is that your nervous system being dysregulated is actually the effect of the wounds.
Welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast, where it's all about taking control of your health, losing fat, transforming your body, and living the life you deserve with celebrity fitness trainer and longevity enthusiast, Ted Ryce. Have you ever felt like your relationship is playing a big role in your ability to get in shape, stay in shape, be consistent with your healthy habits? Because of course it is. Our significant other, that's who we spend the most time with. And if there's some issues in that area, it's going to trickle into other areas of your life. So we talk a lot about the biological side of health on this show, VO2 max, building muscle, supplements, physiology, insulin resistance, all those things, and they're all important. But what I love about today's guest, Thais Gibson, she is going to talk about how attachment theory, which is one of the most evidence-based approaches to, let's say, how we approach relationships and understanding how we show up in relationships and how it's going to shape your life and what it takes to rewire some of those patterns that may be affecting your health in ways you never even thought about before. So she is a globally recognized expert in attachment theory. She's the co-founder of the Personal Development School. She has an incredible channel on YouTube, and we already connected before this interview, and I was like, I love her approach because she talks a lot about the nervous system, more specifically the autonomic nervous system, and how to rewire the patterns of behavior that may not be serving us and affecting our relationships as well as our health. So she's here to break it down for you, what most people miss about health and how their relationship is affecting it. So without further ado, let's welcome Thais Gibson to the Legendary Life Podcast. Thais Gibson, welcome to the Legendary Life Podcast. Super excited to dive into this convo with you today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'd love to frame this conversation around, this is a health and fitness podcast. You're a specialist in relationships. The view here is that there's a biopsychosocial model to health. Health isn't just having a high VO2 max or low body fat or having a certain amount of muscle mass. It's what's the health of your relationships? How are you psychologically? And so really excited to dive into this conversation with you today. And I'd love to just start out with something you talk a lot about is attachment theory. Why is it so important that you kind of lead with attachment theory? What does someone need to know about attachment theory?
Okay, so I love this question. So there's so much like just in this, but first and foremost, your attachment style is really the subconscious set of rules that you learn about love. So how to meet each other's needs, how to express, how to communicate, but also, these sort of fears and triggers and ideas we develop about love. So if somebody has this huge fear of being abandoned because they felt abandoned in childhood, this is actually going to condition their subconscious mind to fear that as an adult. And I always give people the analogy that if you see a bear in the woods and you run away and thank goodness you're safe, you get away from the bear, but the next day you have to go back into the woods. Well, what does your mind do? Your mind goes, oh my gosh, where's the bear? You hear the trees moving and you're like bracing for the bear. And so because you've stored that threat from the day before and your subconscious mind essentially holds everything, it stores all memories ever. It consolidates memories a little bit over time, but we really encode memory more strongly with things that feel more threatening. So because you've stored that threat, that perceived threat from the day before, when the trees blow in the woods the next day and you're walking back through the woods, your entire nervous system and body reacts to that perceived threat that you're reprojecting back out. And this causes you to move into sympathetic nervous system mode. This causes you to produce cortisol and norepinephrine, and you're bracing for impact. Now, that's actually helpful for us if we're being chased by a bear in the woods. But it's not helpful for us if, because of our childhood attachment patterns that we learned, we all have our own versions of the bear in the woods. So if somebody's insecurely attached and they learned that, oh, I felt abandoned as a child, I'm constantly bracing for impact of abandonment as an adult. Or if they felt trapped and engulfed as a child and they're constantly pushing people away and feeling dysregulated by connection as an adult. Well, these things that have conditioned the way that we view ourselves and view relationships have the impact to really dysregulate our nervous system as adults, to cause all sorts of maladaptive and unhealthy patterns. And so really the focus of my work has a lot to do with identifying our attachment style, noticing, what attachment style we each are, which I'm sure we'll get into, but then actually being able to leverage different techniques rooted in somatic experiencing and physiological healing, along with cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, a bunch of different techniques that allow us to rewire any maladaptive behaviors or maladaptive fears and patterns we've learned. And in turn, that helps us regulate better as people and have a harmonious life.
You are speaking my language here. I love it. And for those of you listening, if you feel like there's something about your relationship that has you on edge, that it almost feels like you're maybe more on edge than you should be, or 50% of the time you're on edge, or if you're dating and you feel a bit on edge when you're talking to new people or when you really like someone or whatever the situation is, that's what we're talking about here, correct? Those maladaptive, instead of kind of viewing the situation in a more objective way, you're reacting to it with a stress response, essentially. And I can't wait to hear what that does for relationships. But, in my world, right, like you want stress to be from the gym, you want it to be from doing your cardio, but you don't want it to be from something where you don't necessarily get stronger as a result. So if you have any follow-up there, go for it. But I'd love to hear, like, what are the different attachment styles? And of course, then we need to figure out, like, how can we know what our attachment style is?
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll dive right in. So there are 4 attachment styles. This original body of work came from Cambridge University and the work of John Bowlby quite a few decades ago. It's actually one of the biggest bodies of work studied in psychology, with the most research and sort of evidence-backed studies that have taken place. But what's really interesting is John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth, who are big prominent figures in the attachment world, never really talked about how you rewire your attachment style. And we're not born with it. It actually gets conditioned into us. So that's a lot of the focus that I have is how to actually rewire it. But we'll start with talking about the 4 attachment styles as a whole. So there are 4 attachment styles. Every single person has one. And most people will be able to start hearing what their attachment style is as we go through the different explanations. But the first one is the secure attachment style. So this is roughly statistically supposed to be about 50% of the population. Research shows more currently that's actually on the downtrend. And what I find to be very interesting as well is that the divorce rate seems to go very hand in hand with the statistic of how many people are securely attached. And also securely attached people, they report having the longest lasting relationships, but also, which to me is very important, they report being the most fulfilled in their relationship. So it's not just lasting for the sake of lasting, it's lasting and actually enjoying that relationship. So securely attached people get a specific type of childhood, really. And this childhood is that they get a lot of what we call attunement, approach-oriented behaviors from a psychological perspective. And what approach-oriented behaviors do, which is, it seems so small, but has such a big impact, is when a child is growing up in their home and they are distressed, they are upset, they are anxious, they're crying, any type of negative emotion, a caregiver in their home is attuned enough to notice it quite quickly and to approach them to try to soothe. Now, what that does is it teaches a child uniquely that my emotions are safe to express. It's okay to be vulnerable around other people. I can trust that people will try to be there for me. I can, learn to actually get my needs met through people. And because they are loved, even in their hard moments where they're feeling distressed, they actually develop an innate sense of worthiness. Like I am worthy on my good and bad days because I get love on good and bad days. And so this conditions a child to grow up and to actually be able to model out those behaviors towards others, to be able to be there for them, show up for them. They usually get a lot of modeling growing up for healthy communication. So conflict is something that should be worked through and discussed, not something that has to be a huge rupture in a relationship. And securely attached people have a sense of interdependency. I can rely on myself. I can self-soothe. They usually have more regulated nervous systems. And I can also allow you to rely on me, and I can rely on you too. And so that's sort of the synopsis of the secure attachment style.
Yeah, that is not how I grew up, or a lot
Me
of
neither.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to shoot for, and of course we'll come back to it later. How can we, if we're more avoidant or anxious, or I don't know what the third one is. But how we can start to move towards that, like rewire ourselves towards being more secure. So what are the other three?
Yeah. So the other three will start almost at one end of the continuum. So you can kind of imagine that there's a continuum between the other three. And at one end, you have the anxious attachment style. And the anxious attachment style usually got a lot of, what we call real or perceived abandonment. So a real abandonment is obvious. Unfortunately, a parent leaves and they just don't come back, a fatherless home, a motherless home, or, a dynamic where God forbid, but a parent passes away at a young age, and it creates this deep abandonment wound. But a lot of trauma research shows us, very interestingly, that if we get enough repetition of a wound across our childhood or throughout life, it has a very similar impact on the brain's hardwiring or programming as if there's one acute experience of that. So that's where we tie into real or perceived abandonment, which is you could have a painful abandonment where a parent actually leaves and doesn't return, or you can have a lot of deep inconsistency that causes a child to be like, oh, love is here. Oh, love is taken away. Love is here, love is taken away. And the repetition of feeling like love is taken away across time can also create a big perceived abandonment wound. And what you'll see, for example, is this could be that you have loving parents, but they're just always traveling for work. And you're always left with the grandparents growing up, or they're very sweet and kind when they're there with you, but they're just not home very much. And these types of circumstances, maybe you have a single parent and, they're working all the time just to provide. They're doing their best. But there's this constant feeling for a child that like, wait, love is here, it's gone. Love is here, it's gone. And so this anxious child, they actually adapt to this environment by essentially trying to do everything they can to maintain proximity. So they try to keep really close and they people please. And a lot of their big core wounds from an attachment theory point of view, when we talk about rewiring, we call this integrated attachment theory. From an integrated attachment theory point of view, a lot of the wounds that are there are, I'll be abandoned. I'll be alone. They're very sensitive to being disliked, rejected, excluded. They have a big fear of being unloved because when they feel like love is taken away, there's this wound of, oh my gosh, I'm not loved. And they basically handle all of these challenges that they feel by just trying to get as close as possible. And so a lot of their adult behavioral patterns really are circling around people pleasing, self-abandoning, pretending to be somebody that they're not just to win somebody over, clinging, expressing neediness. They love to move very fast in relationships. And one of the sort of tragic things for anxious attachment styles is they move so fast that it often puts other people, a little bit off from other attachment styles. And so the very thing that they're just trying so hard not to create, they accidentally do instead because the clinging often pushes people away. And so they often go through these cycles as adults of being very likable, charming, charismatic, clicking quite quickly with people. But then very quickly, it's like almost the sand, falling through their fingers because they hold on so tight so fast and they kind of pressure circumstances to move forward in a way that often sort of causes people to end up leaving. And it's almost like they have this self-fulfilling prophecy. And the anxious attachment styles, they tend to make up roughly about 20% of the population. But again, that's seeming to be a little bit on the incline as of more lately.
And avoidant?
Yeah, so our next one is the other end of the continuum. So you have your very far end of the continuum, which is your dismissive-avoidant. And dismissive-avoidants usually grow up with childhood emotional neglect as being an overarching theme. Now, I think people hear this at first and they think, it has to be this like very overt neglect where like parents are literally never around and food's never on the table. And it can be that, but that's the vast minority of the cases. The majority of cases is where we have children who actually have a good sense of security in the home, where like food's on the table and they're at school on time and there's stability, but there's a complete lack of attunement from parents. So a lot of times what you'll see is that a child who's wired, all children are wired for attunement from their parents. And a child who's wired for this and needs this, but doesn't get it because maybe the parents are emotionally unavailable. Maybe they were dismissive avoidance too. They didn't get that in their own upbringing. And the type of messaging you see for avoidance, like children should be seen and not heard, or keep a stiff upper lip, or, these types of messages, a child who's actually quite sensitive as a young one and needs that attunement, when they A, don't get it, and B, when it constantly feels like it's, their need for that emotional connection is diminished, denied, deflected, even shamed at times or criticized, like don't be weak, don't be a crybaby, get it together. When there's a lack of any ability to feel emotionally safe with people, basically this child adapts to that kind of environment by going, okay, well, like, I guess I'm broken. I'm flawed at my core that I need this. This emotional part of me is unacceptable or defective, really. And they shame this part of themselves and try to repress it deeply. And it's not a conscious process, right? It's a subconscious adaptation to being in an environment like that over time. And it gives them a sense of basically control and relief to tell themselves, well, I just need to not need people. And if I just don't need this and I park this part of myself away, at least I feel relief from this pain of yearning for something and constantly feeling rejected. And so as an adult, the dismissive avoidant usually ends up in relationship dynamics where as soon as there's a lot of vulnerability required, they're like, wait, you're forcing me to access this part of myself that I parked away a long time ago. And vulnerability will often be something that causes them to create distance. And so much of how they attach to people is really rooted in, I need to minimize my attachment needs. So as soon as I really like somebody, okay, I just, need to look at their flaws and why it might not work. And then I'm okay because I know I don't really need them. Or if there's a lot of demands on things moving quickly or being, very vulnerable, committing deeply, dismissive avoidants can get really cold feet and they can often push people away and kind of move away from something all of a sudden. And I think people think, oh, like they just don't care. But really it's that there's these deep conditions within them in terms of how they evolved from their own childhood environment to protect themselves. And a lot of it's really this self-preservation.
I don't know if anyone else listening is like, oh my gosh, that sounds like me. Like I resonate with that one more than the anxious, although sometimes I would get or I have, some anxiety dating. So okay, we have securely attached, we have anxiously attached, we have this dismissive avoidant. And what is the fourth one?
Yeah. So the last one is fearful avoidant. And I want to just note something that you said, which is so true. A lot of people assume when they hear dismissive avoidant that dismissive avoidants are like robots, like they don't feel anxiety. Dismissive avoidants can absolutely feel anxiety when dating. Just how they deal with it is to minimize their attachment needs. So like an anxious attachment style, when they feel anxiety, they'll be like, oh my gosh, I need to get closer. Dismissive avoidants, when they feel anxiety, they'll be like, okay, well, let me look for all the reasons it might not work anyways. Or they'll kind of like retreat into themselves sometimes when they feel anxious. So all of our coping mechanisms based on our attachment style, we'll still feel all the feelings, right? But we'll just cope with them in various ways. So maybe suppress a little bit more versus try to cling and get closer. And so that's like a really important piece and a great note that you made. So our last one is the fearful avoidant. So this is our fearful avoidant. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the disorganized attachment style. Fearful avoidance grow up in chaos. Okay. So think of more like acute chaos. You can think of things like a parent with a mental health issue, like a more acute mental health issue, perhaps narcissistic personality disorder, parents who are in active addiction, parents who there's a really bad divorce, there's tremendous amounts of fighting and arguing. And basically the child growing up in this environment learns a few things. Number one, they learn, well, I can't trust my environment or what's going on because everything's chaos all the time. I don't know really how to predict what's whether or not love and connection is safe or scary. And they basically get wired with competing associations. So what this means is you can have something like love and connection, where some days you've got really nice experiences. Let's say, one day, and the analogy I often use is if you imagine mom is an alcoholic, okay? Maybe one day mom is drinking and she's in a good mood and she's loving, and you're a kid and you want that love and that closeness. And she's had a few drinks and she's kind of warm and you're like, oh, this feels so nice. But then mom keeps drinking and she becomes cruel and she becomes angry. And now connection is a very scary thing. And it's a very, a harmful thing even. And then another day mom's sobering up and she's kind of apologetic and feels a little guilty about how she's been acting, and she's a little more kind. Another day mom's maybe going through detox and withdrawals from alcohol, and she's very sharp and snippy and she's in a bad mood and you don't even know if she's okay. So it's like you never know what version of connection you're going to get. And so you get wired to have this, we have a basic need for love and connection as human beings, but you get wired to have very competing ideas about it. Like it can be a really good thing and it can be a really scary thing. And so what this causes is just like an anxious attachment style, their main way of trying to connect is to get closer and closer. And a dismissive-avoidant is to kind of minimize their attachment needs. The fearful-avoidant, their way of connecting and attaching is basically to be extremely hypervigilant. I joke with people that the fearful-avoidant is the human lie detector. They notice everything. They pick up on every little micro expression, body language. I was a fearful-avoidant. That's part of how I got into this work. And I noticed everything. And it's so interesting. You notice all the little changes, any little thing that's out of place, or if a story shifted a little bit. And it's because your mind has been conditioned for a very long time to adapt to an environment that caused you to have to do that. Because if you can imagine, just using that analogy, if a child grows up in a home where mom's an alcoholic, you need to know in 2 seconds when mom walks through the door, is she her nice version or is she her scary version? And I need to go to my room or I need to go for connection. And so, fearful avoidance, they're very hypervigilant. And what's really interesting is they're very hot and cold, as you can imagine, right? So a fearful avoidant ends up going, well, love is a nice thing. So I want love. I want connection. And then when it gets really close, you're like, whoa, I don't know if I can really trust this. Do I really want to feel this connection? I don't really like vulnerability too much either. Let me push it away. And so the fearful avoidant partner is very like, come here. Oh, you're close. Now get back. And there's this hot and cold patterning there, which I think, for people on the receiving end of it is very confusing. But also the fearful avoidant, in those experiences is flip-flopping so much in their own mind. Do I want it? Do I not want it? Do I want to be close? Do I want to get away? And there's a lot of inner turmoil for fearful avoidance until they really learn to do some deep inner work and rewire.
Yeah. And I want to get into the rewiring part. And thanks for sharing about, you being a fearful avoidant. I also, based at least on your description today, I'm not the expert here, but yeah, I fearful avoidant, had alcoholism in my home. Didn't know my stepmom in particular, very hot and cold. And my dad was pretty solid in some ways, except for the fact that he enabled a lot of bad behavior. So if you're listening to this, the good news is once you start to figure out what is going on with your attachment style, you can start to get a better idea of what you need to do to change, to reduce, to really put your nervous system. I mean, the way I would frame it would be to put your nervous system at ease so you're able to, I guess, attach better, but also like communicate better, less reactive. I feel like I've done a lot of work. I have not worked with someone specifically on attachment, but I feel like the psychological work, it's helped me so much. Therapy, I've drank ayahuasca and done all sorts of craziness, right? And for anyone listening right now, it's like, if you feel, I'm 48, I've got a crazier story, and I'll be on your podcast, Thais, and maybe we'll, if it makes sense, we'll get into it. But like, if you're listening to this right now, and you feel like this is a major issue that's holding you back from connection in the relationship that you're in, or blocking you from being in a relationship, and you're listening to this show because you're like, maybe the secret is to get in better shape and to get hot and to lose body fat and build muscle. And yeah, that can be part of it, because we know aerobic exercise can help lower the sympathetic drive, the sympathetic, let's say, activity of your autonomic nervous system. But it's not going to fix the root cause if this is what's causing the dysfunction. So Thais, before we get into how to rewire and everything, I'd love to hear, like you mentioned the fearful avoidant, you figured out what you are, and we talked, you're in a relationship for, I believe you're married for over 10 years. So how did you get into this work? And why did you get into the attachment specifically versus all the other options of psychology, other areas or right, that you could have specialized in? Why do you feel this was the thing?
Yeah, I think a few things. I mean, the first one, I have a longer story and I'll try to keep it brief, but I actually grew up and internalized a lot of chaos for sure. And I am Canadian and I actually went to the US. I played soccer in university and got a full ride soccer scholarship and all these things. But
and bartended in Miami.
That was it's a busy life. But the craziest part of all of it was that soccer was my coping mechanism as a kid. Like it was like the one thing. And I had a knee injury in one of my scouting years. And I thought, I had this big dream, like I'm going to get out of my home. I'm going to get a soccer scholarship, get free, kind of was the idea. And I had a knee injury and I had no other coping mechanisms, no idea how to cope with anything, and was prescribed painkillers and actually originally got addicted to opioids. So I went through a period of time in my life where I struggled with like basically daily opioid use minus little tiny chapters for about 6 years. And my original, I was very high functioning. So like if anybody saw the inside of my life, they would be like, you're a friggin' mess. But I was kind of keeping it together enough on the outside to show up for stuff and to do things, which, everybody's sort of seen that or been there if they've ever been in active addiction or seen somebody like you have a period where you kind of keep it together until you just don't. And so I was kind of hitting this like rock bottom period just when everything was starting to unravel. And I was actually in a psych class. And somebody said to me in a psych class, your conscious mind can't outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. And if anybody has ever been in active addiction that's listening, or even just struggled with like a really painful habit that you're trying to get rid of, like for years, when I first became addicted, I was like, it terrified me. I didn't really even understand like what was going on and the mechanics of addiction before I was already like knee deep. And I would do things all the time. I would say, I'm going to delete people's numbers from my phone. I'm going to get clean by doing this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to stop. And you tell yourself things over and over and over again. And then you fail every day. You lose. You tell yourself, I'm going to flush them down the toilet. Oh, I'm going to, and you don't, and you repeat the pattern. And to me, that was one of the hardest parts of what it meant to be in that phase of my life. It was like this constant like inner turmoil and honestly kind of self-loathing that came with that. Like I just felt so weak and helpless to myself. And so when I'm sitting in this class, I'm on this, at this moment in my life at the time, I'm just like downward spiraling towards my rock bottom. And lots of things are really getting messy in my life in this moment. And somebody says to me, your conscious mind can't outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. And I'm like, so it's not that I'm weak and helpless. It's not that it's that consciously I want out of this life and this habit that I have, this terrible, just like torturous thing that I'm in. It's like, and then subconsciously I have different motives. And so I was like obsessed. I was like, how do I like get free of this? Because this is like haunting me every day. And so I tried at that point in summers in between semesters, outpatient rehab, inpatient rehab, nothing really stuck. I wasn't putting in the work either at that time in my life, but I was starting to get to this point where I'm like, I got to figure out how to change things. And so did a whole bunch of stuff. But one of the things that I did was learned everything I could about the subconscious mind and how it worked and neuroplasticity and how we gain our programming. And I learned a few really important things. Number one, your conscious mind is only responsible for 3 to 5% of all of your daily beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions. So we think that our logical thinking self is the one making the decisions, but not really. It's really our habituated self. And our subconscious and unconscious collectively are 95 to 97%. So we go through this life and we think that, we have all these dynamics and there's a much deeper narrative there. So I ended up, and I'll make this part short, I ended up in a position where I got better. I got clean. I got sober. I couldn't believe it. Like, I couldn't believe that nobody was talking about this. I had done AA classes, NA classes. You don't hear about the subconscious mind. Like, I couldn't believe nobody was talking about these things. And after being clean for a while, and I started doing all these certifications in everything I could about anything that would engage the subconscious mind, hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, cognitive behavioral therapy, a little bit has some flavors of things, somatic experiencing, nervous system regulation work, a lot of these things. And I was like, nobody's talking about this. So I actually started giving workshops to people for free. And a lot of people would come. Suddenly, like 100 people, and I was like 22 giving these workshops to these huge groups of people, thinking like, how did I end up here? Like, just this kind of crazy thing. So it kind of catapulted me into this. People would ask me for client sessions. I was like, I'm still in school at the time, and people were like, we don't care. And so I started my practice early while I was actually still going to school, and it was just a really interesting sort of output of experiences. So that's how I got into this work, and then I did so much inner work on my nervous system, on like a lot of somatic practices, a lot of rewiring my wounds, and we'll get into some of this, and a lot of learning my needs as a person so I could better self-soothe and self-regulate. And it was so profound. And I actually worked with people originally on that. And then after working with people for a couple of years, I met my now husband and realized that like I felt really good on my own, but that I actually like wasn't that good at taking up space in a relationship. I would kind of retreat more. I had healed a lot, but I wasn't good at being vulnerable and wasn't the best at communicating. And I realized that, wait, there's this whole other set of things that I have to do, which is learning healthy boundaries, learning to communicate my needs, and learning to change my behaviors, not just like retreat if I, didn't feel like a need was met, but actually to talk about it, to be more vulnerable. And at the time, it made me revisit attachment theory. And I realized I had done a lot of the self-healing pillars, like regulating my nervous system, rewiring my wounds, and being able to meet my own needs. But there was 3 more, to be able to communicate and be vulnerable, to be able to show up and actually have healthy boundaries and to change my behavioral patterns in relationship. And it wasn't until I revisited what I had learned at a very high level in university psychology classes, that it wasn't until I revisited that I was like, oh, there's other parts that I have to rewire. I have to rewire my communication patterns, my ability to hold tension and be vulnerable sometimes. And when that came full circle for me, it was very healing in my ability to have a healthy relationship. And then I started teaching a little bit more about that. And suddenly all the clients that I had wanted to dive into that space. And so that's sort of what propelled me into that space to begin with.
Love it. What a great story. And I love the passion. You found something. It started answering questions you had about yourself and how to get yourself out of a place that you didn't want to be anymore. And then shared it with people and started giving workshops. And then it evolved from there. And yeah, I hear you, the somatic, would you call it the somatic? What do you call the type of therapy?
Yeah, so somatic experiencing is the work of, Dr. Stephen Porges' work and a lot of the polyvagal theory work. And there's a whole bunch of somatic practices that we can take away from that are so helpful for our nervous system function.
Yeah. And I want to tie this back into what you said, because I think it's really relevant for, I would imagine, so many people listening to this. You had all these issues. You were dealing with them by playing soccer. And when that got taken away, then you're like, whoa, my medicine is gone, right? Like, what am I going to do? And you found another medicine, right? And soccer didn't heal you, but it allowed you to manage some of what you were going through, to manage your nervous system with exercise. And so if you're listening right now and that's kind of hitting home for you, understand, like, if you do get injured or get sick or something happens and you can't exercise for a while, I used to be that way too, Thais. Like I would go to jujitsu. It's kind of funny to say, like, I wouldn't say addiction. I think that's too strong of a word, but like really obsessive, like compulsive, where I would have these, I use drugs too, like marijuana and all types of other things, but I switched it off to Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Ended up getting a lot of injuries because I would be just overtraining as a way of regulating my nervous system. And I didn't understand because I'm 28, I'm 48 now. So it makes so much sense, but nobody was talking about this stuff, right? 20 years ago. So if you're listening right now, and if you suspect that you might be using health and fitness as a way to put a Band-Aid over some of the other things that are going on, especially in relation to these core wounds, or how your attachment style, how you're operating in your relationships, now you know. So there's no supplement or workout routine for that, or raising your VO2 max. So let's talk a little bit about, like, okay, we've talked about attachment styles. That's really the foundation of how we're operating in our relationships, or if we're seeking a relationship. Then you've talked about your own story and how there's different approaches that can really help. But if someone's listening right now and they're getting the suspicion they might be a fearful avoidant like me or you, but they want to, or anxious or whatever, but they want to get more towards the securely attached side, what is the process for that high view?
Yeah. So I love what you said, because actually I find that a lot of people, it kind of like blows by them. So we often use these external things to regulate our nervous system. And I think we'll focus on maybe like two of the heaviest hitting pillars, because there's a lot of information to go into. I could go on for 4 hours, but I'd love to talk about the relationship between the wounds and how to rewire them in the nervous system, because these are two of the things, if we get right, everything changes. And ultimately, more than anything, your attachment style is the relationship you have to yourself, because your core wounds that you have from your childhood, that's your conditioning. So that'll show up for you at work. That will show up for you in your physical area of life. That will show up for you in your friendships, family, career. Like it will go everywhere. And so what's so interesting about what you said, and I love that you called that out, because honestly, most people miss this, is that your nervous system being dysregulated is actually the effect of the wounds. Okay. So if we go back to that analogy earlier and the bear in the woods, so you can do things. We can do somatic practices. There's some great ones. We will talk about that and how to improve your window of tolerance and things like that, which we'll get into secondarily. But if you're only doing the somatic work, or if we're using, to your point, the soccer or the gym, the jujitsu, the exercise as a way of kind of stabilizing or regulating our nervous system a little bit, that helps, but it's always like the roller coaster. You always get dysregulated, you use something to re-regulate, but then like, don't we want to stop getting so dysregulated at the root? And so the root is that we have, these wounds. And so I'll go through the wounds of each attachment style. So the anxious ones, they tend to be abandoned, alone, excluded, disliked, rejected, unsafe is a big one. If somebody pulls away from them, those are some big wounds there. Dismissive-Avoidants, their wounds are very much defective, or shameful at my core, like we talked about, from childhood emotional neglect. Unsafe as well. They feel unsafe around conflict. They'll generally move away. And then also trapped is a big one. Powerless, weak if they're vulnerable, disrespected or misunderstood. Okay, so those are big wounds for them. Fearful-Avoidants, have the most wounds, unfortunately, because you get a little bit of the anxious side and the dismissive side. But Fearful-Avoidants definitely have a trust wound. And sometimes it's not even trusting people. It can be really big with people, especially when people get really close. We can be scared that, okay, they're going to break our trust. But also it's like not trusting the future. It's like not trusting what could happen next, waiting for the other shoe to drop, always bracing for impact in some sort of way. And it causes Fearful-Avoidants to need to control things, they don't usually control other people too much, because they very much value and cherish freedom, and they don't want to infringe on that, but they'll control themselves. They'll be very controlling of their own lives and activities, and always super optimizing everything, which can be great, but also can be like a little bit obsessive at times. And so you'll see that wound. Fearful-Avoidants also have the abandonment wound, because they obviously experience a lot of abandonment. So they sort of share that with the anxious. They'll be hurt around abandonment and rejection. But they also get scared of being trapped. So they have some of the avoidant wounds, like they don't want to be trapped. And they also feel a little bit weak if they're too vulnerable. So they sort of have the wounds of both sides in there. And then they have a little bit of an unworthy wound. So Fearful-Avoidants, they generally tend to overcompensate. They always like over give and under receive, so that they feel like they're earning their worth in the world. they'll over deliver on everything that they can just to feel, worthy and enough. And so you'll see a lot of that. So here's the first thing. Okay. The first thing that people need to understand is that you cannot affirmation your way out of things. Okay. When people realize they have these wounds or these narratives, affirmations are not like, people don't like when I say this, but it's just the truth. Affirmations are not the way to go. And here's why. Affirmations are of the conscious mind. So your conscious mind speaks language. Okay. Your subconscious mind does not. It speaks in emotions and imagery. So the wounds that we have, they are stored subconsciously. Okay. Nobody wakes up and consciously says, today I'm going to tell myself I'm unworthy 100 times and see how I feel. Like nobody's consciously choosing that. So what's happened is like the bear in the woods analogy, we got imprinted. We stored these experiences that we had that were painful from before. They felt threatening. We stored them. And now we see our world through them and we see ourselves through them. So we project those wounds onto everything. Until you heal the wound, you will keep going through the cycle of, oh, I feel like I'm going to get abandoned if I'm an anxious attachment style. Oh my gosh, people are pulling away. Oh my goodness. And then all of a sudden, our nervous system activates because we're perceiving that or projecting it. All of this fear comes up. We have all of this cortisol, norepinephrine, our nervous system suddenly in the sympathetic mode. And so we want to dig into what's underneath that. So I have a tool and I'll actually share the tool here. And it's a great starter tool for people who are new to this because it's a really easy tool and it'll help make sense of the subconscious mind. So your subconscious mind speaks emotions and imagery, like we were talking about. And the way you can see this, which is so interesting, is if I say to you, whatever you do not think of the pink elephant. Like you probably pictured the image of a pink elephant. Your conscious mind hears do not, it hears the language, but your subconscious flashes out an image before you can consciously respond. And so, when we get into this position, we have to realize if we're just trying to do affirmations and you're trying to say, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, it's just going to your conscious mind because it's just language. So what we have to do is we have to basically convert this new idea we want to get into our subconscious mind. We want to convert it into emotions and images. Now, how we do that is every memory we have is actually a container of emotions and images. So if I say to you, okay, tell me your favorite childhood memory, and you're like, oh, I was playing on the playground with my friends, you might see the image of the bright red slide. You might, tell the story and you'd smile, and we see people when they recall old memories, their body language shifts and they smile and their tone changes. And so every memory is a little storehouse of emotions and images. So what we do is a 3-step system. Is we take the core wound and we find its opposite as step number 1. So let's just say an easy one, I am not good enough, I am good enough. Okay, you got your step number 1. And if people were listening, they heard their attachment wounds already, so they know the ones that are going to be really strong for them. Step 2 is we need 10 pieces of memory where we felt the idea that we're trying to create. So 10 specific times we did feel good enough. Okay. They don't have to be big. They can be little things. It can be like, I'm good enough because I got out of my bed at my first alarm this morning. It can be, I'm good enough because I showed up as a good friend 2 weeks ago. It can be, anything where we have specifics. And when we recall old memories and bring them up, we now are using our conscious mind to speak to our subconscious mind. So now we recall this memory of what we did that was good enough, and we feel the emotion, we see the images in our mind's eye. So we record them down. We write them down, little jot notes of where you can put them on your paper. And we have 10 pieces of proof now for how we actually were good enough. Now, step number 3 is neuroscience shows us that neural pathways are kind of like muscles. They atrophy over time if we don't use them. So we need 21 days, the research shows, at a minimum, of repetition, because repetition fires and wires. So we need the repetition of the emotions and imagery. It fires and wires new neural networks in our subconscious mind. And if we listen back for 21 days to these 10 things, we actually build new neural pathways as we divest from the old ones and the old ways of thinking. So as these ones are atrophying out, these ones are getting built in. And ideally, we do this in what's called a suggestible state. So our subconscious mind is the most open to taking in information when we are producing alpha and theta brainwaves, which is usually like first hour that you wake up or last hour before you go to sleep, after a heavy duty workout, after a meditation or an ice bath, like after these experiences where we feel this sort of restfulness afterwards, our brain's producing more alpha brainwaves and we can really soak up or sponge up more information. So in summary, what you would do is you take your core wound, you find its opposite. You get 10 pieces of memory to support the new idea that you are in fact good enough, or that you're worthy of connection instead of abandonment, or you can have your freedom instead of being trapped, right? So we find 10 pieces of memory. We record it down. We can literally record ourselves saying it into our phones. Listen back when you first wake up in the morning, and you're really trying to make sure that you feel about it and you see the images. It only takes 2 or 3 minutes a day. And what you're actually doing is you're rewiring these core wounds. And this is something that I've done with tens of thousands of people at this point, and we get people to actually score afterwards. And when people stick to the 21 days, we have a 99.7% score for this, and people actually absolving themselves of core wounds. And we've had more than 40,000 people go through this. So this really works. And it's always a lot more work to not do the work. So I really suggest anybody listening, if they're like, oh man, these wounds are really giving me a hard time, it takes 2 to 3 minutes a day. And you can actually let go of like years of having to fear abandonment or betrayal or these things that are often popping up for you. And it's a really important place to start.
Yeah. And if you're having trouble doing this on your own, and even though you get the concept of it, make sure you go to Thais's website. So it's university.personaldevelopmentschool.com. That's university.personaldevelopmentschool.com. And you get a 7-day free trial here. And do the work. I feel like these conversations are hopefully inspirational, educational, Thais, but I often feel like without the commitment to either working with a coach or a therapist or joining some type of course or cohort, it doesn't get done. It doesn't get done consistently, certainly not enough to meet that minimum 21-day standard. So again, if you're listening, not fully sold on joining, make sure you go to Thais Gibson, her YouTube channel. You can find her at Thais Gibson Personal Development School. That's ThaisGibson on YouTube. Some great information there. I just want to throw that out because I always feel like people hear that you gave them the tools to do it. They might start with a lot of motivation and just life gets in the way and then you stop doing it. So I just want to quickly interject that.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Of course. And Thais, this also brings up stuff for me out of my world, or one thing that isn't necessarily in my world of health and fitness, but the negativity bias that so many of us have, where we have a tendency, just human beings, period, have this tendency to prioritize negative experiences, look at negative experiences, or not overvalue, but place too much importance on negative experiences because, well, I guess the evolutionary reason for that would be that kept you alive. But we're not living in to your example, the bear in the wood. Most of us, unless we're in Alaska or I don't know, maybe somewhere in Canada, I'm sure you got to watch out for the bears. But yeah, if you're not dealing with those types of things, your nervous system can kind of skew negative. And so I could see how this could help. I think what you said about the affirmations is so important where, yeah, you are lovable. I don't believe that, but I'll keep saying it, or whatever the core wound might be. But when it comes to my world, I also started thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. For me, it's like, we know that sleep is important in memory consolidation. So something that I often talk about, it's like, if you're not sleeping well and you're trying to change habits, whether it's health habits or trying to rewire these core wounds to change your attachment style, and you're sleeping like crap, or you're adding on some type of drug like alcohol or marijuana that's affecting your sleep architecture, that could be that can kind of make the process take longer or make it ineffective, perhaps, or not as effective as it could be. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. There's actually something called the overload principle in psychology, and it shows that when we're overloaded, so when our brain and body are overloaded through poor sleep, through alcohol, substances, things that are disruptive for our homeostatic impulse, we end up being in a position where we're like not able to take things in as well, where we're having a more difficult time. And so that's why, there are like tremendous benefits too. Like we have these sort of 6 pillars of healing. One is rewiring your wounds, and then it's your needs and your nervous system and communication boundaries, rewiring your behaviors. And the wounds is a really important root cause point. But the next really big piece in there is also things that are going to allow you to stay more regulated from a nervous system point of view. And what's really interesting is that our mind and body, I think people think, so if you go into it a little bit more deeply, there's sympathetic, which is our fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, but there's parasympathetic, which actually kind of in a sense has other branches. So we've got dorsal vagal and we've got ventral vagal. So ventral vagal mode, and from a parasympathetic standpoint, is when we are, in a place where we're feeling sociable, we're feeling open, we're feeling, regulated and good. When we're in a good mood, we're usually in ventral vagal. Dorsal vagal is if you've ever had one of those moments where you like had a long day and you get home and you like kick off your shoes and you're like, I just need to sit down for a minute. And then you just like stay on the couch and you shut down and you just don't move. And maybe you like skip dinner and you just stayed there. It's called dorsal vagal shutdown. And, what can happen is we can be in that space as well. And so there's a lot of different really powerful nervous system practices. And I'll maybe just share, 1 or 2 that can be meaningful. But we want to be pairing these things, right? So we want to be able to do the rewiring at the root, but we also want to be doing things that are allowing us to actually move through things that we're feeling in our body and being able to regulate. And so, at a high level, there's the obvious. There's the breath work. There's the meditation, the mindfulness practices, the yoga, all of these things that help slowly move us into parasympathetic nervous system mode, but really ventral vagal mode, and help us re-regulate if we're feeling distressed. But also, somatic work has a really powerful impact on the nervous system. And a great practice, and this is out of Dr. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, and there's a lot of great people who go into this as well, Dr. Daniel Siegel, but we can actually work to practice feeling our emotions in our body and witnessing these sensations of the emotions rather than telling the story that's created them. So sometimes, if you're mad, let's pretend you're mad at your coworker and you're like, God, they did this thing and then they did this, and you're sitting at home like thinking about it and ruminating. What we're doing is we're actually, through our thoughts, refeeding the emotion and then recausing the stress. And if instead we can get into a position where we practice somatically processing. And so what that means is, and I'll tell a quick study here. So there was a really powerful study done, and this will explain the exercise the best. This study was done, I believe it was out of the University of Bordeaux in France, and they had a whole bunch of participants go into fMRI scanners, and they watched what happened when the participants recalled things that bothered them, that really upset them. And what they found when they were watching their brains essentially was that all of this brain activity in the neocortex regions of the brain, so like the prefrontal cortex, our logical thinking, kind of analytical self, all of this brain activity when people were triggered drained out of, in a sense, if you imagine all these red dots, drained out of our neocortex regions and really went into like the amygdala and the triggered version, the more like reptilian version of ourselves, in a sense. And then what the researchers had participants do is sit there, and instead of telling the story that bothered them and upset them, they instead had them just focus on witnessing sensations in their body. So saying, okay, I feel angry when I say this story. And so label the emotion, number 1. And number 2, anger in my body feels like heat in my chest. It feels like a clenching of my jaw. It feels like a tightening of my shoulder blades, and describe the physical sensations. And they had them do this physical sensation focus for up to 90 seconds at a time, repeated 3 times. And this is a somatic practice that allows us to titrate emotionally. And what they found is that when individuals did that, all of a sudden, all this brain activity, each time they were doing it, would go out of the amygdala and go back into the neocortex regions. And they would come back online to the sort of, in a sense, higher version of themselves, right? Not the reptilian version of themselves in the reptilian brain areas and regions. And so this is a really powerful somatic practice that also allows us, if we sit and actually practice feeling our emotions, noticing them in our body, witnessing the sensations and sitting with them, and we do this for 60 to 90 seconds at a time, repeat for 2 to 3 times, that actually also is the power to not just help us get into our better brain activity regions, but also regulates our nervous system and moves us out of sympathetic back into parasympathetic mode. So it's a really great sort of secondary practice. And I find that when people are starting to pair those two things together, that's where they see massive results in quite a short period of time in regards to just being able to feel better, both within themselves, their self-esteem, self-confidence, and ability to really regulate.
Yeah, so important. I didn't have to, but I had a client recently who he's changed his body. He's ripped, right? Leaner than me at the moment. But he's dealing with a lot of stress at work. And we've already gone through the conversation. I have, conversations with my clients. I'm like, well, is this job a hell yes for you? Is your relationship with your wife a hell yes? It was yes across the board, no hesitation. But more recently, he's had a very stressful situation happening in his company. He's an executive in this company, had a stressful situation, just exercising and being ripped and having a good family. It wasn't enough with the travel and everything else. And so if you're listening to this and you don't have some type of practice where you can calm your nervous system down, or you find yourself like the example you used, Thais, I think it's so common, right? I mean, you had this thing go on with someone and you're still thinking about it, and it just keeps your nervous system activated instead of you realizing what it really is. It's not about the story. It's the chemicals are going and you're still triggered. Your fight or flight state is activated, and you need to calm it down to shut it off so you stop caring. Because I think this is so important. In fact, in my relationship with my ex-wife, I remember the first time I meditated, I was angry about something. Don't even remember now, right? But I was like so angry about it, and there was a legitimate problem. Then I meditated, and then I was like, oh, yeah, there's a problem, but I didn't even need to feel all that nervous system activation about it. And now, to your point, like the blood activity is flowing back into my prefrontal cortex. I can communicate like a human being instead of a dumb angry animal. And it's like, I was like, it was just fascinating, right? So if you're listening now, you don't have something like that. There's another example. So important.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly, it's so well said, is that you get into a point where I love the way you articulate it. Like the problem will still exist. There can still be a problem, and that might be a time to go communicate your needs or figure out what they are or move through a wound if it's there as well. But at the end of the day, when you're in a parasympathetic space, everything feels more solvable. It doesn't feel like this huge thing. Like it feels like, okay, this is maybe frustrating or not optimal, but like we can address it, we can approach it. And research shows too, the more we practice these habits on a regular basis, both rewiring, both the nervous system regulation work and somatic practices, the more we're doing these things, the more we are actually accustomed to being in that nervous system mode. And the more we operate there as our baseline. When a lot of people, I'm sure you experience this. I know my experience growing up was like, I was always in sympathetic, like all the time, like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn was like all my behaviors all day. And so, I'd always be in one of those modes, and doing a lot of this work, rewiring the wounds at the root, then regulating my nervous system. It's like your new baseline becomes one of peace or joy, right? And then you're able to move through life in a completely different way. And so, I love that you shared that. I think it's such a powerful point.
Yeah, because you're not stuck with like the story, like what you said. It's not the story, it's your emotional activation, right? Where, the story can still exist. but you can change how you feel about it. And like you said, everything feels more solvable in a more relaxed state or more parasympathetic. I forget the two versions.
Ventral vagal. Yeah, the ventral vagal mode.
The ventral vagal. That's a state where everything feels like, yeah, okay, there's some challenges, but you do it one by one, or you figure out the solution instead of being like, oh my God, there's so much going on. Right? Or whatever, however your freak out might sound. That was my best impression. But Thais, this was an incredible conversation. I would love to have you back on the show. I mean, I've never heard you break it down like this, but I've had people talk about attachment styles on this show before, but the way you talked about it and made it, I don't know, it was just easy to understand, easy to see, at least for me, myself in your examples, and to give a better, clear picture of like the work that still needs to be done, let's say. So thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite podcasts I've been on. You asked like amazing questions and they were so insightful, and I can tell you really know what you're doing. So thank you for having me. Really appreciate being here.
Absolutely. And again, if you haven't checked out Thais's website, university.personaldevelopmentschool.com, right? And she's on YouTube. Great. Tons of videos there. 400,000 subscribers. So you got a little bit of popularity here, so just an incredible YouTube channel. Go and check it out. If you felt a connection or saw yourself in some of the examples that Thais said today, and you've been a person who's maybe been listening to this show and maybe listening to other shows, and you're so concerned about your VO2 max and other things, but you're not getting the peace in your life, go and check Thais Gibson's podcast out. Go to her website. Make sure you deal with the root cause. I want you to feel better out there, okay? So thanks so much, Thais. Again, it's been incredible, and I want to do this again.
Me too. I would love to. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to have you on. So that'll be amazing too.
It'll be a lot of fun. Can't wait. That wraps up today's episode. And I want to ask you, what insight did you get from my conversation with Thais? And more importantly, what steps will you take to change what you became enlightened about? And if this episode hit home for you, make sure you hit the subscribe button, because we've got even more mindset, health, fitness, biohacking, and high-level strategies coming your way so you can live your best life in your 40s and beyond. Hope you got a lot out of this one today. Have a great one, and speak to you on Monday.